There we go. Yeah, I think we're good. See, I'm all out of practice, Keith. All right, so here we go. The Keith Giles. I don't know if you saw that in the invite for the Zoom link. That is the title of the Zoom link that I sent, was The Keith Giles is
I
joining
didn't
the show. Yeah, because
didn't
when you
notice that.
put the in front of it,
Uh-huh.
it makes it a big thing, right? It
Oh, I
makes
guess it does.
like the Ohio State University,
Right,
right?
of
Yeah.
course.
Either way, I don't remember how many times you've been on the show. We said it before I was recording. More than three, less than six. So let's call it.
Something.
Let's call it whatever. Yeah, you almost get a free kids meal or something now.
Yeah, my punch card is almost full. I get a free something, a bumper sticker or something.
Yeah. I will print stickers and I will mail you one.
Thank you.
You'll have the only one.
Okay.
So anyway, in all seriousness, welcome back to the show, man. Glad to have you here.
Seth, I always look forward to talking to you. So thank you so much. It's always a lot of fun.
It is. Yeah. I did not know that we were bringing drinks, so next time I'll do better. I will do better next time.
I mean, I don't know. Am I allowed to drink this on camera?
You can do.
It's a child.
It's holy. It's holy.
Show.
It's holy.
This is my old fashioned. Yeah.
I would hate to have it get weak on you as it melts. So
yeah, that's true. Well, I have a pretty large ice cube in there, but yes, it will melt slowly. I'll just full disclosure. I have one of these almost every night, but typically before I go to bed.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, this is actually, we did the research. You can look it up. I encourage your listeners to look it up. It's good for if you have high blood pressure. Apparently, some whiskey is good for that. So
I enjoy the whiskey. I'm not opposed to the whiskey. I mean, we established that I recognized your drink from its brief stint. Right. So I'm not opposed to the whiskey. Anyway, what's been new, man? It's been gosh, it's probably been over a year since you were on the show. So what is new for you?
Oh man. Well, over the last year, I don't know what's super new. I will go on and give you it may not be much of a scoop because as we were also saying before we hit record, we're not sure when this is between the time we're recording this and when it'll come out. But I think I'm safe to tell at least you something that you probably don't know, and it may or may not be the first time your listeners have heard of it. But what's new for me in the last 6 months or 8 months is that Matthew DeStefano and myself will become the new co-owners of Quire Publishing very soon.
That's
and
cool.
At least as of January of 2023. So we are gearing up for all of that, and getting ready to take it to the next level.
That's a lot. So that's a lot. I don't know anything about publishing anything. I sometimes think I could write something, and that's even intimidating, which is funny when you just breathe out books, it appears, when I look at how quickly you write books. That's a big deal. What makes you want to buy a book publishing company? Or I don't know if buy is the word, acquire? Assume?
Well, yeah, it's not really. It's I'm not sure how much I can divulge, but it's essentially that Raphael Palindo, who started Quire 5 years ago, it's just grown to the point that he has a day job that isn't Quire. He does other things for his family. He just had his second child a few months ago.
Oh, that's excellent.
He's really busy with his day job, and really felt like he was kind of holding back Quire. That Quire could really be doing way more, but he's just not able. It doesn't have the bandwidth. So he approached Matt and I and said, if we'd be interested in taking it over, and we both were
That's
like,
cool.
yes, we will do that. So we will be, we'll be the new co-owners of Quire, and
that's
we're
cool.
already slowly behind the scenes, sort of learning the ropes of all this stuff. So
yeah,
it's kind of odd because I started off self-publishing my books. I was so excited to get a publisher to be working with Quire. And now in a weird way, I'm back to self-publishing because now I own the publishing company, but I know a lot more than I used to know.
Yeah. Well, just even in like when I think back on the history of the show, so some of the first guests were people from Quire, 4 or 5, 7, 8 years ago, however many years it was. So it's been fun to watch Quire grow as well. I don't read all of the books, nor do I agree with everything that comes out of all of the books.
Right. I don't
but
either.
that's okay. It's okay. But that's cool, man. That's excellent. Yeah. And so you're back in Texas. And so that's really all that matters, right? And then, yeah.
Sure.
What else is new? You've written probably 27 more books since the last time we spoke because you finished your Jesus on series. And I think, I don't remember that would have been the last time you were on.
Yeah, Jesus
Um,
Unarmed was the seventh and final book in that series. Yeah, and
yeah.
then I just wrote the book we're going to talk about, Soul Mysterium. And I'm kind of in an odd place at the moment where, I mean, I'm working on several things, but I think for the first time in 5 years, I honestly do not know what my next book's going to be for
Mm,
sure. I mean, I'm working on a series of articles that I'm doing every week through this thing called Inner Circle on Pathos, and it's a subscription only thing. So every week I write a commentary and article on one of the sayings of Jesus from the Gospel of Thomas, which will eventually be a book. Um, I have an idea for a fiction novel that I've been wanting to write for a
mm.
while. And that might be my next book. I don't know. And then I'm actually even deciding that I think I might turn Sola Mysterium into at least possibly a trilogy. So there
Mm.
might be a
You
second
can't
book
help
to
yourself.
follow up.
You cannot
I know
help
I
yourself.
can't. Well, yeah. I mean, I've always got to be doing something. You know what I mean? I've got to be writing. I've always said this. Even if you're a writer, writers write. I know a lot of people that say I'm a writer, but then they don't blog, they don't journal, they don't, you don't have to publish something, but you have to at least be writing
Hmm.
something. So for me, yeah, I've always got to be busy writing something, and hopefully, eventually, some of those things turn into a book down the road. So
Yeah. So Sola Mysterium is the name of the book that what, if, I think it was May,
uh-huh,
June, July.
uh-huh.
I'm way behind because
It was,
again,
I
I
think it
decided,
released, yeah, the end of June, or yeah, June 28th, something like that.
yeah, I just decided to take a summer break, and so I'm definitely way behind. So we've missed the book launch, and that's my fault.
It's okay.
So
You're
in
doing
the
okay.
in the order of the six solas, where does Sola Mysterium fit in there? Because we've got Sola Scriptura, Sola.
Yeah,
I don't remember all the solas. And for those that aren't paying attention, there are not six solas. So
there's five. There are
whatever.
five solos, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So what should be the defining order there, and where does Mysterium kind of fit in?
It kind of that's an interesting question because when Luther came up with his five solas, Sola Mysterium was not one of them. So I'm sort of creating
Hmm.
my new kind of thing. Like I feel like at least for myself at this point of where I'm at in my own kind of spiritual journey, Sola Mysterium is kind of one of my own personal solas where I feel like and so what that would mean, Sola Mysterium is a reference to only mystery.
Mm,
I should say also that the Latin is wrong. The title, David Bentley Hart is one of my heroes in the faith, one of my favorite New Testament scholars. And when I sent him the book, an advanced copy of the book, he let me know in no uncertain terms that Sola Mysterium, and this is a quote, he said, it's gibberish. It doesn't, that you can't say that. And he gave me this long reason why. And he suggested two other ways of saying it that were more accurate in
mm,
Latin.
yeah,
But I just basically decided that most of my readers don't speak Latin.
correct.
And I really like Sola Mysterium as a title.
And it's my book. So
And
let's
it's
go
my
with that.
book. So tough. That's the title. So yeah, it's meant to call attention to the solas, as you pointed out. Um, and I just feel like if we're going to talk about theology, and I say this early in the book, this is kind of the thesis of the book. Anytime we're talking about theology, I think we have to be honest and humble and admit that if theology is the discussion of God, then, and if God is by definition of being beyond human comprehension,
Hmm.
we can't then turn around and say, now let me tell you all about God.
Yeah.
Because, well, you just said God is being beyond human comprehension. So I'm trying to take it back to like uh, a different posture. Like I think a better way to approach God and theology is more from a place of mystery. And we can get into this too, but I also suggest a different way to approach the idea of knowing God,
Yeah.
which is not through information.
Yeah. Well, so the first thing that I highlighted in the book, and I want to be clear, so the poems that are spread out throughout the book, those are you, right? Like
Oh yeah, I wrote
I've
those.
never
Yeah,
read you. Yeah.
there's two poems sort of in the book that I wrote those.
Yeah, so the one that begins the book, I'm curious because I want to rip apart a specific stanza because
Oh, good.
it's an I don't know how to say that word. I think I said it right this late at night. There's
And
this
not, and you're not the one drinking. So
Yeah, yeah. I think that's how you say that word, apophatic. poem,
Uh,
which is a fancy word, and I'm gonna let people Google it because I don't feel like explaining it. You can if you want, but I just don't feel like it. But was that poem written after the entire corpus of the book, or did you write that like years ago, and it was something that kind of led into this? Because
yeah,
you talk about, we need to talk about God entirely differently.
yes, I wrote it chronologically. I think I wrote it before, well, at least before I finished writing the book. I may have started writing the book.
Mm,
Um, yeah, the poem just kind of came to me, and I think actually that poem was a blog post
mm,
in the form that it's in. I might have tweaked it slightly by the time I got it into the book, but yeah, it kind of came, I would say, before or at least during writing the book.
yeah. Yeah, so I'm going to edit your stanzas because there
Sure,
are 5 lines that to me are the overall theme of the poem. So
sure.
there is a mystery that seeks to confound you when you speak of all you know of God, which is nothing. You speak more of yourself than God. And it's that next to last line that you speak more of yourself. Like,
Mhm.
can you rip that part apart?
Yeah. Um, well, because what we end up saying about God often is really more a reflection of who we are and where we are, than it is honestly saying anything that we know with any sort of certainty about God. Um, you know, there's a quote. I mean, Saint Augustine said something. It was like, and I quote this in the book. You know, if you understand it, it isn't God.
Mm,
Well, it made something, but that isn't God. Um, and So yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm going with that statement. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to skip around Keith, and I should have asked
No,
you
go
ahead of
for it.
time, but the book's already out, so I can quote your book to you because
That's
someone
right.
else already
Please.
has. Yeah.
Yes, please do.
Yeah. So there is a part in the intro actually, which I don't know if that is the intro. I can't remember if the intro is you or if that is
Yes, it is.
the
Yeah,
yeah,
the forward is Steve McVeigh,
that's it. Yeah.
and then everything else after that is me.
Yeah. So you say to experience God is to become acquainted with awe.
Hmm.
Um, and then later on in chapter 2, in Rethinking How We Know, you quote John 17:3. I think it's John
Yes,
17. It could be 5, it could be 3. I don't have the scripture verse written down,
it
but
is
I like the book of John. So
17:3. Yes,
yeah, as that to know is being a different no than the word that we use for no. And that is an
yes,
awful sentence, especially when I know I'm going to transcribe this later and I'm not going to know where to put the commas.
uh,
But what is the difference between knowledge and experience and its relationship with awe? Because I don't think that we think about those words in the same way that you're treating them in your book.
yeah, yeah. Well, well, I guess I'll address specifically the question about John 17:3, and again, that happens early on in the book because this is establishing some things I really want to um, make clear. So a paradigm shift basically that I'm working on in the book, and that is this idea of what Jesus says in John 17:3. Quite often, you and I've talked about things like this quite often in the past, that are English translations that most of us have on our shelf, or that we go to when we're trying to understand, theology and God and things like that. Don't do us a lot of favors. So because Greek and Hebrew are much more nuanced languages. Uh, and then when you translate it into English, a lot of times you're losing the depth of the meaning of the word. And so it's not incorrect to read an English translation where Jesus says in John 17:3, eternal life is this, to know God and his son whom he has sent. The problem is in English, if you just say, if you read that and you say, oh, well, then eternal life is to know God. Um, in our modern evangelical Christian, the way at least I was raised, knowing God is about having the right information about God. We read it as if that's what Jesus means. That okay, well, it's very important that I know the right information about God, or that I know, the details, the data. I can pass this theological quiz, and that's actually been my experience growing up in Christianity. It was very much my experience that in Christianity that that was the most important thing. I had to get my theology right. I had to have all the right information, the right doctrines, etc. But that is not at all what Jesus means there. So in the Greek, there's sort of two main words that Jesus could have used there. If he meant what I just said, this idea of knowing God through having the right information, this sort of head knowledge of God, if that's what he meant, knowing God like that, which I think most of us assume, then he would have used in the Greek, in the Greek, if you go to that text, it would have said episteme. Episteme is having the right information. But that is not the word he uses. He uses a very scandalous word, frankly. I think it's a very shocking word if you really do understand the Greek, because what he says is that we should gnosko God and his son. And gnosko is the same word you would use if you were going to talk about how a husband, a man on his wedding night gnoskoed, he knew his wife and she conceived a child. That's the gnosko. That's the word he uses for to know God and his son. So that is not information. That is the absolute, totally different direction from that. So if we can understand, like it should be a breathtaking, scandalous, shocking, like, whoa, what? Jesus is saying that eternal life is to know God and to know Jesus with this level of intimacy that's similar to the way a husband knows his wife, so that it would conceive new life within you. Now that's a pretty amazing thing. And I think that is sort of some of the things we've missed when it comes to us talking about and thinking about our relationship with God. And so that's where I'm coming from on this idea of like this. I think we need to shift our way of thinking. When we think about knowing God, I think we should be talking about it in those terms. Knowing God and knowing Christ in this deeply intimate experiential way. And for me, that's when it gets to this idea of awe, where it becomes like, man, I can't believe I am being invited into a connection with the creator of the universe that is that deep, that intimate, that personal, and that has that goal, that the goal of it is this sort of the conceiving of a new life within me, a transformational process. So I said this before, it's not that the gospel is not about information, it's about transformation.
Yeah.
That's one of the key things that I want us to understand in this book.
Yeah. That's also a part that I highlighted in yellow, electronically highlighted, but highlighted nonetheless. So thinking about, all right, how do I want to frame this? Because it's going to feel like a tongue-in-cheek, passive-aggressive, smart-ass remark. Like just.
Thanks for letting me know that.
Yeah.
It's coming.
But I don't know how else to ask it. So thinking about God in that manner, or Christ in that manner, what purpose should dogma or belief, and by belief I mean what you think you understand about God, because it's true to you, deeply true to you, based on paying attention to details to the divine in the same way that you would pay attention to details to someone that you deeply love. Like, what purpose does dogma hold, or for that matter, telling anybody about it? Because I think the way that we love people in the culture that we live in now is like that happens in my four walls, and what happens with me and my wife is none of anyone's business. Hopefully that question makes sense, because that's like, what is the purpose of any doctrine or dogma with that view of the divine?
Well, no, I think it's a good question. I guess what I'm trying to say is that yes, there are these sort of two things. There's orthodoxy, which is those doctrines and beliefs and things you think you know about God, your best guess, right? Although again, I'm urging people in the book to acknowledge that it's their best guess, that you don't have certainty about those things. You believe, you believe, you think, you hope, yes, but you can't say you're certain about any of those things. But that's okay. We all have beliefs, and we all have our doctrines and the things that we hold on to. And so, of course, we have those things. That would be our orthodoxy. I think, though, what Jesus emphasizes more is the orthopraxy of those core sort of beliefs about who God is and what God is like, and then how we interact with God. So in your analogy, yeah, the um, the mechanics and the actual um, activity of you and your wife having these kind of connections and emotional, and intimacy, um, happens in private. That's between you and your spouse, and the same for me and my wife. But at the same time, it's not as if when we're out in public, you don't notice that we love each other. You know what I mean?
Mm,
Like to the depth and degree that there is that depth and that intimacy and that sincere, genuine love and respect we have for one another, that will be reflected when we go out in public, right? It won't be, are they together? Are they married? You know what I mean? You pick up on at least the reality of that relationship and that connection, right?
mm,
So I think it's, again, just for me, at least for myself, that's why I think the orthopraxy is so important. And I would like for us to maybe turn the weight back towards the emphasis on the orthopraxy side of it, um, less so than the belief side of it. And again, I feel like this is something Jesus does is all the time, and I feel like Paul does this. Like this is New Testament, teaching here. That what I'm
mhm.
saying. Like
Yeah.
Jesus, one of my other favorite passages in John is when Jesus, he washes his disciples' feet, and then he says, "Do you understand what I've done for you? That I am your master. You call me master and Lord. Yep, that's who I am. But yet I have humbled myself, and I've taken the form of a servant, and I've washed your feet. And so you should do the same for one another. You also should humble yourself and wash one another's feet." And then he ends it with this, to me, the most powerful statement, one of the most powerful statements Jesus ever says. And he says, "Now that you know these things," in that case, he does use episteme. "Now
Mm,
that you know these things, you'll be blessed if you do them."
mm,
And I think I spent so much of my own uh, spiritual life growing up believing that I was blessed if I knew it, that knowing it, the episteme, having the head knowledge and having the doctrines, having the theology, that if I had all that, that's how I'm blessed. And Jesus says, no, you're blessed when you put those things into practice. You're living those things out in a real, actual way. And I think that starts with this intimacy that we have with God and with Christ on this deeply personal level, that is something very real for us.
mm,
Um, and so I say also in the book, it's closer. So I think we should. I think the goal is that we should become people who are less capable of explaining and describing and defining that that awareness of God and that knowing of God, but we are more than capable of experiencing that.
mm.
And again, that's where I want. That's where I'd like us to, at least what I'm trying to do in my own life. But I'm in the book. I'm trying to encourage others to kind of also see that and begin moving also in a similar direction.
Yeah. So chapter 4 made me deeply uncomfortable, and I still don't
Mm.
know why. I think it's because of the type of like church I was raised in.
Yes.
Because you talk a lot about prayer in chapter 4. You begin with a story about, you know, you were basically the way that I read that, this sniper story that you had there is it reminded me of those Facebook ads that says, "Hey, stop real quick and try to shoot this robber," and you never can because you have to download the app instead to do it.
Of course.
Yeah, like all of chapter 4, like praying in tongues, I believe is in chapter 4, or speaking in tongues, or
Yeah.
however, like
Yeah.
all of that I'm uncomfortable with, and
Okay.
I don't actually know why. It's
Right.
a me thing, but
Sure.
what am I to do with with chapter 4? Like that is quite literally what I wrote down. My question actually says, chapter 4, holy cow, can I be honest? What am I supposed to do with this? Like that is
Right.
my question that I wrote down that I wanted to ask you.
Wow. Wow. Well, it's funny because there's a lot in chapter 4. So you're right. I think the majority of chapter 4 really is a series of personal stories of
Hmm.
myself.
Yeah, just wave
Um,
after wave. And to be clear,
yeah.
I read that while my daughter was doing gymnastics. And so I'm
Uh,
reading it on I think I had my computer, I'm reading through it, while they're doing their thing. And it literally kept shutting it. Like I can't read anymore. Cause like I don't know why. I just,
yeah.
but I know that's a me thing because other people tell stories like that.
Sure.
maybe it's because I feel like I know you better than I probably do. But like, I don't know. I genuinely don't know what to do with that.
Right. Well, I mean, let me ask you, does it bother you that I'm having sharing these experiences, or are you reading with a level of skepticism like, oh, come on, that didn't happen?
No,
Or
no, not skepticism. More like I've never experienced anything like that.
okay.
Like if I was to try to explain to you, and I'm not going to equate the two, but this is just the only experience that I can come up with off the top of my head.
Yeah.
Like I, where I live is beautiful in a weird way, and like I can't describe a sunrise specifically because it's always foggy, and I live on a mountain, and so you literally drive through a golden fog almost every morning,
Oh
but the
wow.
colors change and sometimes there's rainbows in front of you as you're driving.
Oh
But
wow.
I also, but that doesn't do it justice, but that doesn't make it any less true.
Yeah.
And like, and that was my experience, but I would never be able to write it down. But to hear someone else, they would go, oh, that's cool, but they haven't experienced it. And so I'd never experienced prayer or God really in this manner.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that's why I'm so uneasy with it, for the same reason
Yeah.
that like I think someone that is terrified of, not terrified, that doesn't understand how big holes can be when they show up to the Grand Canyon and they're like, wow, this
Oh
is a big, I didn't know they did this. I've
yeah.
only seen, like, I didn't know the earth did this. I read
Yes,
about it, but it
exactly.
didn't, you know what I mean? So I
Yes.
think that's why I'm uncomfortable. Like, it's just so foreign to the way that I experience
Right.
God.
Right. And so I think part of a couple of reasons why I put all so many of those, like you said, one after the other, kind of personal stories like that in the book. Two reasons. One, honestly, my wife Wendy read the first draft of the book and said, because it was just all like, me making comments on scriptures and quoting other people and kind of all up in my head, kind of explaining stuff. And she said, no, you need more personal stories in this. People need to know that you've experienced the stuff you're talking about.
Mm,
And so I was like, okay. So okay, I went back and that's why in chapter 4 I just kind of shared several different stories that are things I've experienced, and that's not even all of them, to be honest. But
mm,
those are probably some of the more significant ones. Um, so that was part of the reason. But the other reason is I wanted people to maybe even for like you, like people like yourself, because I've learned over the years. It took me a while. I'm sorry to say, it took me a while to figure this out. Not everybody has had these kinds of experiences that I've had.
mhm,
For the longest time, I just assumed, oh yeah, Christians, we have these kinds of things all the time. I had this happen to me, and you tell me what happened to you, and we're like, wow, isn't that cool?
mhm,
But it took actually during our house church experience. There were people that were part of our group that would just say like, yep, God, I don't feel like God's ever talked to me like that, or I've
mhm,
never had any kind of like word of knowledge or wisdom. I've never seen a vision. I've never had this really intense spiritual experience like that. And that was the first time I really realized, like, oh, yeah, well, we're all different, aren't we? Like,
mm,
we don't all have that same kind of place. Now, at the same time, and I think later on in the book, I get into this. So even though I think most of us, not all of us, have the same kind of spiritual experiences like this with God, it's not that I don't think we're all capable of it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think, well, some people do and some people don't. Like, I mean, I think that's true, but I
mm,
think for the people that don't, um, I don't think it's impossible for us to have these kinds of experiences. Now, that may not be exactly like this. That may not be as intense or as frequent. But I think our ability to, hear the voice of God, to experience the presence of God, I think it's going to be different for everybody. I do believe that. I have learned, like through my Square One group, and I've had so many different people, share different stories, and we talked about this specific thing with people that I think a lot of times we may be experiencing something profound, something spiritual, some connection with God, but we just don't know to call it that. You know what I mean?
mhm.
So, but I deal with that later on in the book. And
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I mean, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make anyone uncomfortable by telling those
No.
stories, but
So
I
yeah.
wanted to at least say, look, hey, these things do happen. At least these are some things that have happened to me.
Yeah.
And if nothing else, maybe spark a little bit of curiosity, like, wow, well,
Yeah.
how did that happen?
Yeah. Well, let me back up a second. So, uncomfortability is something I'm okay with. I'm
Okay,
totally
good.
fine with it. I usually get grown and stretched. I've never seen God in the way that you describe, and I'm intentionally not describing them because, quite honest, I don't know what my follow-up questions would be, and so I'm just uncomfortable already there.
Sure,
Though I
sure.
do want to talk about time, which is at
Yeah,
the
that's
end
the
of
next part
chapter
of the
four.
book. Yeah,
Yeah. But before I get there, so I experience God in ways that I can't describe, because it's
yeah,
not wrapped to like like an experience that has been verified. But like you
yeah,
tell the story of like you and your son, there's a story with you and
yeah,
your father. Like there are
yeah.
all these other. I don't have that.
Got it.
But like I see the way that I see, like I see God in humans all the time, which really
Yes.
sounds simple and stupid. But
No,
if you
no, I
don't
don't think
look
so.
for it, you don't see it,
Yeah,
and it equally makes me very angry at times, because I don't know why I just get angry, and other times I'm deeply like moved
yeah,
when I see that, depending on the situation. So
sure.
that's very a general answer, but I don't feel like getting into more details than that. So,
Yeah,
yeah. So, no, you towards the end of chapter 4, you talk about time, space, perception, reality,
yes.
and you capitalize the terms time and space, which I'm curious as to why those are capitalized or if that was not intentional. Actually, it has to be intentional because you
Yeah,
capitalize
it
it.
was intentional,
Yeah.
yes.
So, why capitalize them, and what does time and space have to do with the way that we experience God?
Well, I mean, I capitalize them, I think, just because I want people to, I want to emphasize that what I'm talking about is this concept of time, or this
Mm,
concept like capital T time, capital S space, as these massive sort of like the dimensions of space and time. And I don't know if that's grammatically correct. Maybe I'm wrong to do that, but
well, you started
uh,
with Mysterium, so the rest of the grammar doesn't
sure,
matter.
exactly. Why bother? Why pretend? Um, but um, but I mean, yeah. So, like you say, what does that have to do with our experience of God? Well, I mean, it's the right now in this physical body, in this reality that we're living in. It's really the only grid and filter that we have to experience anything, right? Is in time and in space. Like these are the dimensions that we are operating in. And so we can't help but experience God, through time and through space. What I'm trying to do in the book, and this, it's again, it's something I'm at the end of chapter 4, I'm just beginning to kind of sprinkle in where we're going down the road, which is much more deeper into science and biology and
Mhm.
quantum and all kinds of stuff.
I will
Um,
say I'm glad that you went there because it was reassuring to the way that my brain works to have all of these things that I could latch
yeah,
onto that I could Google and less
yeah,
experiential. So I appreciate you doing that.
yeah. Okay, yeah, 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 yeah. So I don't know. I mean, it's something where like when I was doing research for the book, um, I started reading like Carlo Rovelli, who's a phenomenal quantum physicist. I think he calls himself a theoretical physicist. And he's written several amazing books on things like, I think he has a book called Reality is Not What It Seems. And again, from a total scientific, he's not a theist, but just from a total scientific perspective, looking at time and space and concluding things like time isn't real.
Mm,
And what, like what? So, when I'm studying these things, and I felt like I was connecting some dots for myself, like, okay, wow, like, of course, if we're talking again about this God who is this being who transcends knowledge, who is beyond human comprehension, then of course this God has to transcend time and space. God is not limited by those things. My perception is limited by those things,
mhm.
absolutely. But I can't confuse my perception of those things, which is limited, with my perception of a God who I relate to through time and space, but is not limited at all by time and space. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I actually use time and space as the words that I use when I try to explain God to my kids,
Yeah.
which happens frequently. What I'll tell them is whatever it is that we worship, it exists at a rate that you and I can attain or try to, but is
Mm-hmm.
also outrunning light
Yeah.
and an expanding universe, which is also outrunning that light.
Uh-huh.
And somehow it's bigger than that. And so that's what we worship. And
Yeah, exactly.
it's
That's
intent
good.
like I don't but that doesn't make any sense. Like it literally makes no sense. But I
Well,
don't know
yeah,
how
but
else to
see,
say
again,
it.
so much of this is, I think that's exactly right, Seth, because like so much of, if we're going to talk about God, I mean, I think going back to that poem, in the poem, I say something like, don't talk to me of all that you know of God, which is pretty practically nothing.
Mhm.
Let's talk instead of all that you don't know about God or what you don't understand about God. And see, to me, that's what you just said,
Mm.
right? Yes, God is this being who somehow is outpacing light and the expansion of the universe. Now, I don't understand that, but that at least I think is closer to reality than any other conception of God I could have,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, definitely. So in chapter 7, you pivot into quantum theology, which is just
Mm-hmm.
a fun, like I started internally calling it Schrodinger's theology, but it's the same thing. But
Sure.
there's a quote in there from Sir James Jeans. I don't know what their
Sir James
nationality is.
Dean. Yes, I love this
Um,
quote. Yes.
the stream of knowledge is heading towards a non-mechanical, non-material reality. The universe begins to look more and more like a great thought than a great than like a great machine. And then
Yes.
this is the part that caught me. So mind no longer appears to be an accidental intruder into the realm of matter. We ought rather hail it as the creator and governor of the realm of matter.
Mm-hmm.
Can you break that apart a bit? Because those are big implications, and that there were a lot of words there, even though I mumbled a few of them. Like, what is that? If you could open that up a bit for people.
Well, I will try. Because I mean, this is the reason why I started researching and reading all these quantum physicists because like that quote, I love that quote. Um, so I guess it's better to put it in some context, right? So Sir James Jean is a world-renowned physicist. I mean, very highly respected. He's not some quack somewhere, off on the side, like, oh, he's actually a dentist. No, he's a quantum physicist. He's a real guy. I mean, he writes things that appear in Science, which is like the highest peer reviewed scientific journal, in the world. Um, so when someone like that, I mean, we have to first know who these people are that are speaking. They're not weirdos. Um, so when they go in print and they publish a statement like this, which again is being it's something that's being published to be read by other quantum scientists and physicists and things like that. And so this is who he's talking to. He's not. I don't know that he would even bother to try to say this out to the general public. But these are the things that he's saying as a physicist to other physicists to say that what they are learning through quantum science is leading them, some of them kicking and screaming, to acknowledge this reality of what he says. This idea that the universe, again, just paraphrasing what he says, that the universe, we can no longer think of the universe as a great machine, meaning it's not just matter. It's not just physical, atoms and molecules and things like that. Because again, scientists for the longest time have really been, they don't believe in, basically they don't believe in the spiritual. They don't believe in anything they can't scientifically prove. So that's why this quote is so powerful, because of what they're seeing with quantum, it is leading them to make statements like this, which essentially are saying the universe is not a mechanical thing. It's not just matter. It's not just physical. That there is when he says that instead it's a great thought or a consciousness, right? And I have also watched interviews and lectures by some of these quantum physicists when they are coming to the same conclusions or talking about the same things they're discovering through quantum science. And they'll stop themselves and say, okay, now I know I sound like a theologian right now, or I know I sound like a metaphysical, philosopher right now, because they hear themselves. I mean, it makes them nervous. Like they don't like that this is what the science is telling them, but the science seems to be telling them that yes, consciousness has more to do with our universe than just the mere mechanics of it.
Yeah.
And again, why that's exciting to me is that it feels like we're living in a time in history where, because of the advances in quantum physics and quantum science, scientists are beginning to acknowledge some spiritual realities that mystics have known for a long, long time, right? And that's why it's fascinating to me when you start seeing them echoing and affirming some of these ideas that like another idea is this idea that I think even Carlo Rovelli says this, that it's the idea of illusion and separation, like individual objects in space. We see them as separate individual objects. Like the chair is not the table, and the
Hmm.
table is not your car in the driveway. Okay, and so that just seems intuitive. Duh, of course
Hmm.
not. But again, on the quantum level, what they're seeing is that yes, it appears that those things are different objects in the material world, but at the quantum level, they are all the same quantum field. But what you are seeing and experiencing are different expressions of the
Yeah.
one quantum field.
Yeah.
That's where it starts to break your brain.
Yeah.
And then this gets down again to this on the spiritual level to this idea of, well, there is no separation between anything in the universe. Everything is one thing. Everything is one shared, oh, here we go, we're getting weird now. Or some shared consciousness or some shared
Yeah.
life or
Yeah.
force, or, they call it the quantum field, but whatever you
Yeah.
call it,
Yeah.
there's a level of understanding that this is the sort of the basement of reality, and this is what it looks like, which either makes you really nervous or makes you really excited. So it kind of makes me excited. I'm like, wow,
Yeah.
this is really cool.
Yeah. I wonder if the way that quantum scientists have to give the caveat of I might sound like a theologian here, if like ministers and like professors should have to say, I might sound like a quantum scientist here, but go
Right, that'd be
with me.
fun.
Yeah, that would be
Right.
fun. Yeah, so I don't remember the book, but I remember reading it. And I don't remember the book because it was sent to me before it was printed. It's like literally loose leaf sheets of paper, and so I read
Yeah,
it that way, which was a fun way to read a book. Never read a book
sure,
that way.
sure.
But it was by Jim Danaher, which if you've never had him on your show, you should have Jim on the show. Jim is
Okay.
freaking brilliant. But he says in the first book that I read of his, which is not his first book, that like prayer and like knowing and love are like an act of expression of like entirely focused attention. It's like when you pray in silence. And the way that you know that you're there is because your attention is just so focused that all you hear is nothing. And also all you hear is everything because
Yes,
you're finally paying attention to the things that you don't quite understand.
exactly.
And that's a bad paraphrase from something I read 4 years ago, but it's a quote that has stuck with me. And so
Wow.
that's not quite right, but it's close to that, which makes me think a little bit of what you're saying. And then you say even on later on somewhere in a different chapter, I can't remember the chapter, it's towards the back third of the book, of that we exist just because God observes us. God creates things by simply looking at us, which makes me think of what you just said. And then that
Yes,
also makes me think of a Pete Holmes sketch, which I don't know if you've ever seen it. You know Pete Holmes, the comedian?
yes, yes.
He has a bit, it's from 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, and it was like his first time. It was the first big bit that he'd done after Crashing became a show on HBO, which if you never watched that, it's a hilarious show.
Okay.
He's like, let me tell you about things that don't make sense. He's like, you and I were made of molecules and atoms and electrons and these quarks and all this other stuff. He's like, that doesn't make any sense. He's like, and now your eyes would tell you that this phone is different, and that doesn't make sense. He's like, but that's also, it's so some of my molecules have just moved into this phone and some of its molecules have moved into me, but we're also the same and we're also separate. That doesn't make any god sense. And he
Yes,
just keeps getting progressively
I
further.
think I have seen that
Yeah.
clip actually.
It's
Yes,
absolutely amazing. Hilarious, but also like
but
accurately describes
true.
what you're saying. Like he's like, I don't what doesn't make any sense. And we're laughing about it. And I'm
Yes,
laughing, I don't so it just makes me
yeah.
think of that. Yeah. The other idea, which we don't really have time to rip apart, is the idea space, which is something that I then began to buy books about. And so my
Oh,
wife would like
really?
to,
Yeah. No,
yeah, my,
that's fascinating. I was so excited to write a book that I could talk about idea space because I'm so fascinated by that
well,
concept.
then do it. Take as long as you want. No one's
Really?
awake but you and I. Yeah, go
All
for it.
right. I don't want to take us too far off, but yeah, it's in the book, idea space. Yeah. So I guess to summarize it, um, the idea space came about because people started noticing, and I document this in the book. I got dates and names, and you can look it all up. I did tons of research on this, and it's such an amazing thing. So like going back to like I think even as far back as maybe the 1500s, 1600s, but way, way, way back before there was telephone, internet, any kind of sort of global or even communication that was instantaneous like we have today. And that's important. You're going to see why. So go way, way back, to those days when there was not interaction between people around the globe. And people started noticing that in science, in medicine, in mathematics, multiple people, 2 or 3 people at a time, would have the same discovery, would have the same aha moment all across the globe at the same time, and with no communication or connection with each other. No internet, no telephone, not like, hey, Fred, I just found this. Oh, yeah, me too, right? So, in other words, they didn't discover it until most of them like went and applied for a patent, or they went to publish something at the same time, and it'd be like, oh, well, you have a book on this, but so does this guy. And so it just started happening, and I think it's called the principle of dual discovery. It's dual discovery, but sometimes it's more than 2. So 2 or 3 people, maybe sometimes 4 people, will discover a certain thing or invent the same thing or have the same, aha moment, and it just keeps happening. So it's happening all the way up into modern times, where again this thing just keeps happening. So dual discovery, idea space was sort of a way that people started trying to figure out, why does this keep happening? Like it doesn't make any sense. Some of these people don't even speak the same language. You have a French guy, an Italian guy, and a German guy, and like they live in different places. They don't talk to each other, and yet they all have at the same time. We're talking weeks or days apart, and they're having these same discoveries and like inventions and things like this. And so idea space, the idea was like, well, then there must be sort of, again, this is going to sound super weird, but it's as if those ideas already exist, like or that those ideas sort of pop into being, let's say, at the same time. That idea pops into being. And if your antenna is up in sort of this idea space, going back to your quote about paying attention and focusing, right? Mm-hmm. So you're thinking about something, you're focused on something, you're searching for something, you're looking for something, you're seeking for something. Jesus says, you knock and the door will be open, seek and you will find. So people are seeking and looking and thinking and studying and focused. And because they are doing that all at the same time, multiple people around the world at the same time will catch that same idea. They'll go, there it is. And then it just becomes a race to who can publish it first or get it out there first. But so it's the suggestion that that this is where ideas come from. That ideas basically sort of pop into being, and I guess you could say in like a collective unconscious, right? This is something Carl Jung talked about. That there is a collective unconscious that all humans sort of tap into. And the thing is, we're all tapped into it, but we don't all sort of catch the same thing because we're not all focused or thinking or looking for that kind of thing. But those who are will catch it at the same time. So it's really amazing. I actually came across it initially through some science fiction writers that I really like, and they were doing an interview and they brought it up, and I was like, that's crazy. And then I started researching it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is really, really fascinating. So yeah, I love that. I really love that whole idea of idea space.
It definitely was. Yeah, and you're not wrong. So like you listed a few out. There's a bunch. You can just Google it, and there are many other examples. So I want to try to wrap this last question before I ask my actual last question, in a way of summarizing a chapter the best that I can internally. So in chapter 10, strange frequencies, which is also very fast, like something that I wasn't aware of. The way that like harmonies, and there's a I forget the word that you use. It starts with a C, like symbolic. Yeah. Did not write the word down. So thinking about that, you and I as being images of the divine. So with all of this like wondrous, overwhelming, cacophonous musical rhythm between you and I and the world that we live in, and knowing that things exist because we observe them in the same way that things exist because God observes them. And I do think that you've said that well. Like I never thought about it that way, but the more I've thought about it, I'm like, yeah, that actually feels good. Like that feels right. Because again, it's just intention. And it also bears things out of love, because that's what attention is.
Yes.
What or why can we possibly hate? Because those two don't stand together with me. but
Mhm.
obviously we do.
Yes.
So what do I do with that? Like, what or why, or I don't know.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, that definitely becomes sort of the begging the question, right? I think the more you do start to recognize, like, oh my gosh, all of us are so impossibly connected with God, right? We all have this incredible connection with God, and then therefore, by implication, one another. Again, because if this quantum field thing is correct, then it's not me and you. You and I are both expressions of the same field, the same
Hmm.
thing. I would call that God. I mean, science is calling that quantum. I mean, to me, I can't help as someone raised as a Christian, but to go back to this idea that, well, no, Christ is the one through, that, all things were made by him, for him, and through him, and nothing was made that, without him, and that he's Christ sustains all things, and Christ is our life, and all these things. So that's how I understand that. So, like, oh my gosh, if as Jesus said, I am in the Father and the Father is in me and I am in you. Okay, wow. So there's an amazing, mind-blowing, beautiful implication. Like that, it's something that I think you could meditate on it for the rest of your life. It's just so powerful and profound and beautiful. Like, man, I am so deeply connected to God. And again, it pulls back, it pulls into me all these other statements like Paul makes about we are filled with the fullness of him who fills everything in every way. And nothing will ever separate you from the love of God. Angels, demons, height, depth, even death itself, nothing will separate you from this love of God. Um, wow, that's just so amazing. But again, it's if you really, 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 really get it, if you meditate on it for a little bit, you really start to understand that it's not just that I'm this deeply connected to this God who is love. And if you are too, then by implication, I'm also connected to you and everyone else in the universe.
Mm.
And so, yes, then it definitely does beg the question of, like, if we really get it, if we could really grasp this, or at least begin to hope, to believe that this is real, this is reality, this is truth. It's truth that we see in the scripture, it's truth that we see Jesus and affirming, and Paul affirming. We see it in, I mentioned this in the book, we see it affirmed in many other religions, many other faiths. Now we're seeing it affirmed in quantum science and things like this. Like, we have to get it. Like, this is a big deal. This is a fundamental thing about who we are and who God is and who everyone else is. And if we really get it, then we would truly understand the meaning of when Jesus says things like, whatever you've done for the least of these, you've done it to me. Because you and I are connected. Like, whatever I'm doing to you, I'm doing to Christ. Whatever you do to me, you're doing to Christ. But I'm also, whatever I do to you, I'm doing it to myself.
Mm.
Because we are so connected. This idea of abiding, when Jesus says, abide in me and I will abide in you, there's a whole other word study you could do about abide. Like, abide, and he's the metaphor of the vine and the branch.
Mm.
Can you draw me a line on a, like, pull off a limb, of like a grapevine or something, and draw me a line with a marker. Where does the vine end and the branch begin? You can't. It's the vine and the branch is one big
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And so there is a level of oneness there that if we really get it, we would truly love our brother as ourselves, love our neighbor as ourselves, because we realize that we are connected. We are inseparable from Christ and from one another in this really beautiful way.
Yeah.
Um, it to me, it connects almost every dot. It pulls everything together in such a beautiful way.
Yeah.
And I think if we really did get it, then we can't go to war. I can't do violence to you. I can't even lie to you. Why would I do that? I'm harming you, right? Because I recognize that we are the same. We're more connected than I could even imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So, my favorite question, I think I've asked this of you before. Maybe I didn't ask it of you. It doesn't matter. So, when you want to, which is funny because you begin the book with things that we can't know or say about God. So, when you want to wrap words around whatever it is, I say, hey, Keith, when you say God, what do you mean? What is that?
Oh, so you're asking me when I say God, what do I mean?
Yeah, or divine, or whatever word you want to put there. Like,
Yeah.
what is that?
Oh man. Well, it's hard, isn't it? It's hard to express this into words. I guess what I'm realizing is most of the ways, the majority of my life, the ways, the language I was given, the concepts I was given, I'm just more and more realizing how inadequate they are to describe God. Like, I think even the English language is so it just isn't equipped. It wasn't designed. The English language is not designed to have any conversation about God. We can't say it because God is not an it. I can't even say he or she because God is not, has no gender. God doesn't have any parts. You know, God is a spirit. So, you know, we have some beautiful language um, in the New Testament, right? That God is love. Um, I've been really inspired and blessed by reading and studying, you know, other outside of the Christian world and how they express God, and it's this beautiful, you know, a spirit, a being, a father, a grandmother, a grandfather, um, a being that deeply loves us, cares for us, created us, um, is connected to us, hasn't abandoned us, would never abandon us. But I mean, how do you know what I mean? I don't know that there's language. I
Mm,
guess more and more I'm feeling frustrated that language just doesn't do a very good job
mm,
of expressing that. But at the same time, when I take time to take a walk around the block or spend time in silence or you know walk in nature or talk to my wife or my kids or you know what I mean, like I definitely find myself, as you said, experiencing God in some profound ways. Again, just glimpses. You can never get the whole thing,
mm.
but you get glimpses and you go, ah, there it is. Wow. You know, thank you. So it's tough. I don't know. Again, I definitely feel like someone who is less capable of defining and explaining, but I definitely am grateful that I'm capable of experiencing it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. What should human beings that are listening to this, where would you direct them to do the things in this world that they should be doing as it is to either support the work that you're doing or maybe have them go do something else? Like, where do you want people to go? Like a little call to action or whatever. Like, what should they be doing?
Oh, wow. Um, well, I mean, in just a general sense, other than hey, buy my book or whatever. Yeah, I think
Do buy the book, read chapter 4, and then come back and
sure.
listen to it. And if you're like me, you'll be like, "Oh, I see what he was doing. I see
Yes,
why.
okay.
I see why he was shivering in this chair." So,
um, but I mean, no, what I want people, I kind of in the book with this kind of idea too. I want people to trust themselves and trust their own ability to to have these kinds of connections with God, to hear God's voice. I think so much of the theology again that I grew up with tried to convince me that my thoughts are evil all the time. My heart is wicked and deceptive. I can't trust myself. Oh, don't do that. And all these little alarm bells go off, you know, like, oh, no, no, that's dangerous. But it's not. I mean, I want to tell you, if Jesus is the one telling you, I'm the good shepherd and my sheep hear my voice, then you can. And it's less about your ability to do that correctly. It's more about the good shepherd's ability as the good shepherd to make his voice heard.
mm,
You know what I mean? So trust that the good shepherd is capable of being heard clearly. Don't worry about your ability to do that. And so yeah, learning to trust yourself and your own ability to know God that way, because I think that's what it's all about.
mm.
Um, but when it comes to the other stuff, yeah, you know, if people want to know more or if they want to interact and stuff, I'm on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all that. And uh, you know,
Yeah.
I'm happy to connect with people there in different ways like that too. By the way, I have to mention my podcast. I have a new solo podcast that I do called Second Cup with Keith. That's been a lot of fun. So anybody's curious about that, check that out on wherever you find podcasts.
Did you start the second cup when you were driving at that job in, I want to say Utah, Idaho? I forget exactly where you were,
Yeah,
but I remember when you began those. Is that the genesis of that whole concept, or were you doing them
yeah.
before that?
I started. Well, yeah, I just started doing it on Facebook. I would just go live
Yeah.
on video on
While you were
Facebook, and I called
driving,
it.
right? Like going from here to
Yes,
there.
sometimes yes. I'd be
Yeah.
driving in the
Yeah.
car, and I had
Yeah.
Second Cup with Keith. Yes,
Yeah. I remember
and
that.
yeah, I just decided I like that name, and I decided, well, I want to do a podcast like that. So
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Keith, it's always a pleasure, man. I enjoy what you do. Um, and I enjoyed the time. Thanks for sharing your time with me.
Seth, I appreciate it so much, man. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, let's figure out